operation is Mount Vernon Farm, and Cliff Miller and Mike Peterson. This is actually a totally different objective and a slightly bigger operation. They're about 800 acres. And Cliff Miller and his family have been farming this same land for 6 generations now. And they have it's actually a beautiful place. They have got a pre-Civil War era house on the property that they've recently turned into a bed and breakfast to provide another income stream for the enterprise. And they do grass-finished lamb and beef, pastured pork, and pastured eggs. And for Cliff, a big part of the operation was to figure out how to take it into the next generation. So again, they were year 1 of the Future Farms program. And he wanted to create a strong management team. Cliff has 2 kids that live in Richmond, and Sperryville is actually further north. And they are not interested in being involved in the day-to-day operation of the farm. And a lot of farmers that we work with are faced with the same thing. You know, many farmers used to say to their kids, you know, get out of farming. You can't make a living at it. It'll kill you. Go do something else. Go to college. Go to university. Go find a way to make a living. And now, of course, they're sort of reaping the whirlwind because they're getting older. Cliff is actually 72 years old. And he's faced with a 5th generation farm with essentially a possibility of nobody willing to run it. And he's invested a lot of time in it. So his goals were to find a strong management team for the future of the farm and to improve productivity. And one of the things he said is that because of their planning, they did not take off as much when they grazed. And their fields did better this year as a result. And Mike Peterson, the young man who's his farm manager, said when we measured our stockpile a month ago, we already had 20 additional days of grazing than we had last year. And he's projected to feed half the amount of hay. Well, hay is something they buy in. Or they have to have the expense of having somebody come in and custom cut and bale their hay for them. So simply the process of having the cows harvest the hay for them has made a huge difference in their operation. Not only the logistics and mechanics, but the expense as well. And I have to say, one of the things that I was very excited about was that when I was talking to Cliff Miller about this, he said this whole process would have never worked if we hadn't had this program to go through, because the communication that we have now is so much better. Cliff, like I said, he's the owner of the property. He brought Mike Peterson in. And interestingly enough, Mike is 26 years old. He is a trained chef. In fact, he came to Mount Vernon Farm because he was a sous chef at a restaurant called the Inn at Little Washington, which I don't, probably up in this area, you do know it. It has a national reputation as being an incredibly top-notch restaurant. They use a lot of local foods and a lot of local produce, and people from Washington, D.C. travel out to this little town of Washington, Virginia to go to this little restaurant. Mike was a sous chef there, and he came to Cliff and he said, I want you to let me be an intern on your farm because I want to learn where good food comes from. I know how to cook it, but I don't know how to produce it. And Cliff kind of blew him off. You know, what do I need a chef for? And to his credit, Mike was persistent, and he came back about 3 months later and said, no, I'm really serious. I want to do this. So Cliff hired him as a temporary intern. When I first met Cliff, he had a different farm manager. And when I came back and saw him a year later, Mike was there, and I asked him what happened. He said, well, the couple that had come before didn't have Cliff's vision for this. And so remember we talk about communication. So he had a farm manager that Cliff was hoping to carry on the message and the work, and the farm manager had his own vision and was really sort of counterproductive and maybe even a little passive-aggressive in not implementing this. So when he brought Mike in and found a like-minded person, this operation just really started to take off. And it's amazing when you have everybody pulling in the same direction how much progress you can make. And he said, with 1 full year of training under our belts, I think we'll view our entire annual plan differently. We are actually going to make a budget. Interesting. 5th generation, never had a budget. They're going to project sales. They're actually going to treat this much more as a business and projected expenditures, etc. And which is something they've never done before. Think about that. In a year, they've changed the way 5 generations of this operation have looked at how to manage this farm. I think that's incredible.